Hi guys, Small here. A bit of a different content today. I'll be taking a look at Marcille, the new limited 6-star operator from the Dungeon Meshi collab on the Chinese server of Arknights. Marcille is a splash caster with a unique skill points recovery system and stunning animations, pun intended. However, it seems that her reception has been lukewarm at best so far, so let's dive into what she actually does and see if the claims of her being kinda bad are actually true. I'll be referencing the Arknights wiki for her kit details and I'll drop a link to it in the description. First up, let's talk about her talents. Marcille's first talent introduces her mana system, which is the unique way in which she recovers skill points. Basically, the only difference between mana and skill points is the way in which mana is gained. Marcille gains mana automatically while she is not deployed. You can see this as a green border around her portrait. When her mana is full, the portrait starts to blink. Unfortunately, there's no way to check the exact amount of gained mana before deploying Marcille, but once she is on the field, you can see it like regular skill points. Another useful bit of information is that when you retreat Marcille, any leftover mana is added back to the pool and then starts recovering again. As long as Marcille has mana, her first talent gives her a little boost to her attack and splash radius, which increases from 1.1 to 1.5. Besides letting Marcille look pretty in your deployment bar, there are a few other ways to recover mana. One simple way is to use Senshil skill 2, which can restore 10 mana at level 7. Not really much, but it's better than nothing. Another way to recover Marcille mana is to use SP recovery skills and devices. You can see this with Stainless for example, but also in that game mode that all Arknights players love to spend time on. So you can get mana when Marcille is already deployed. Cool. But can you lose mana after deployment? As it turns out, Necrosis burst damage can do just that and more, preventing Marcille from activating skills. Second talent is straightforward. Marcille starts with some mana and gives buffs to the Dungeon Meshi team members, if you bring all of them. And this is kind of disappointing in my opinion. On one hand, only the Dungeon Meshi operators benefit from these buffs, while Shu provides team-wide buffs under similar conditions. On the other hand, the Dungeon Meshi team members aren't exactly going to be your first picks, so you'll be wasting a lot of slots in your squad if you want to include all of them. And of course, you also need to pull for them first. Okay, so the start isn't particularly exciting, but I would say that it's also partially revealing of what was the true intention of the developers, creating quirky and unique characters meant for fun and synergy rather than dominating tough stages or chasing the meta. And I can only respect Hyperglyph for not trying to cash in on the collab by making these true limited operators overpowered. Let's dive into Marcille's skills now. They all follow a similar pattern. Marcille begins chanting for a few seconds, and if she's not interrupted by things like stuns, freezes or burst damage, she casts her spells. While chanting, Marcille does nothing, and I think this is the biggest issue with her kit, much bigger than the mana stuff. As we see, this chanting can take a lot of time, and you don't always get the luxury of having dead weight on field for so long. But let's start with skill 1. This skill can be toggled on and off and is pretty straightforward. Marcille chants for about 1.5 seconds, and then, for each attack, she spends 2 mana to boost her attack power. If no enemies are in her range, she heals friendly operators instead. The numbers here aren't spectacular, so this skill might seem pretty useless. However, it turns out Marcille becomes a rather competent healer with this skill. Not quite on the level of your altar, but this burst healing is noteworthy nonetheless. Skill 2 is likely Marcille's best skill, and also her AFK skill. The skill activates automatically on deployment and after chanting lasts indefinitely. You can also end the first skill activation to start a second chanting and get the improved version of the skill, which gives some extra buffs. Ideally, you want to stop the first skill activation as soon as possible, unless you are in a tight spot. Each activation requires a lengthy 11-second chant and 35 mana, so you basically want to deploy Marcille only when her mana is full. Also, you need to be careful with this skill activation. activations. If you stop the first skill activation and don't have 35 mana for the second one, Marcille will still exit the skill, and then she'll just stand there, looking at the enemies clapping your cheeks. Overall, this skill has a shorter ramp-up time compared to other popular AFK S damage skills like Golden Glow skill 2 and Logo skill 1. On the downside, Marcille does literally nothing during this ramp-up time, whereas Logos and Golden Glow can immediately lessen the pressure on your defenders, and this can be a huge deal. As for the skill effects, you get everything you would expect from a top-notch splash caster. A fast attack rate, a large range, and some crowd control with slow and stun. Those allow Marcille to handle hordes of enemies quite well, to the point of being a strong alternative to Logos. The stun is admittedly pretty short, but can still be useful against some bosses. Here you can see how skill 2 can chain stun Patriot. Well, at least for a bit. Skill 2 DPS holds up well against other AFK art skills, as long as there are multiple enemies and magic resistance isn't too high. Let's see some numbers to illustrate this point. In this first graph, you can see that with 5 enemies, Marcille can compete for the top spot, until magic resistance becomes too oppressive. Of course, when you consider only one enemy, things change a lot. Now Marcille is at the bottom of the ranking, and this makes sense actually. Splash casters aren't really meant to perform well in this setting. Now, let's talk about skill 3. Marcille starts a first chant that lasts 5 seconds and can be followed by an additional 10-second chant. If you stop the second chant, she unleashes a single AoE explosion. If you let her finish, she uses all her mana to unleash extra AoE explosions, one for every 8 mana spent, each at an interval of about 0.35 seconds. So at full mana you get 10 explosions. Each explosion has a substantial attack multiplier and can stun all enemies around high ground tiles. This attack multiplier is impressive and scales well with attack buffs, such as Warfarin's skill 2. However, unlike defense, magic resistance reduces the attack by a percentage rather than by a flat amount. This means higher attack values lead to greater reductions. As a consequence, without some rest ignore, even this high attack may not be enough to put a dent on some enemies. You can see this against Patriot, even with some help from Warfarin. This skill has a lot of flaws in my opinion. It seems to be designed to tackle tough, hard enemies, but these enemies usually have high magic resistance, and as we've seen, this skill struggles against those enemies. At the same time, this skill burst damage is overkill against enemies with low magic resistance. Second point, the 15-second advance cast time for burst damage feels cumbersome and excessive. Having to plan each skill activation 15 seconds ahead can be hard, and most people will prefer more straightforward operators. Also, keep in mind that Marcille must not be affected by CC while chanting. Finally, the second activation consumes all of Marcille's mana, so you'll need to retreat and redeploy her afterward, which conflicts with her high redeployment cost and time. The skill has some value for its crowd control effect. Stopping the second chant gives you an on-demand AoE 4-second stun with a limited number of uses, which can be quite useful. This can help with some bosses if they are not immune to stun, and might be useful against hovering enemies, like the flying ship and those enemies in IS-3 that drop after being stunned. Let's turn to Marcille's Y module. This module reduces her deployment cost by 8 and increases her initial mana by up to 15 points. It also provides a boost to Marcille attack and attack speed, which is always welcome. I'd say level 1 is a good breakpoint for a module. Deployment cost has always been a big issue for splash casters like Mosima and Dusk, and it's no wonder that these operators also received a module cutting their DP cost by 8. As for level 2 and 3, the initial mana boost is a nice bonus, but Marcille's kit is such that you probably won't deploy her very early into a stage. Her chanting takes some time, so you'll need another operator to handle enemies while she's getting ready. By the time you have lane holders in place and you're ready to deploy her, her mana will likely be full anyway, even without the module boost. Let's briefly touch on skill, modules and potential upgrades. Here's a chart showing how Marcille's skill DPS increases with each upgrade, starting with 0 potentials. In general, if you enjoy using Marcille, I'd recommend getting skill 2 to mastery 3, opting for module level 1 and skipping the rest. We're almost done. One last question remains to be answered. Should you pull for Marcille? If you're a collector kind of player or you're just a big fan of Dungeon Meshi, then this is a no-brainer. A limited collab operator is a true limited operator that may never rerun again, so you should totally snatch her while you can. If you are after a new meta operator, unfortunately you might want to skip this one. Marcille has some unique features, but also several issues that hold her back. Skill 1 is decent for healing and convenient for roll compression, allowing Marcille to act as both healer and damage dealer. But overall the numbers aren't there, and those are important when we talk about meta. Skill 2 is good for AFK play and has a relatively short ramp-up time, but other operators like Logos and Golden Glow can already cover this role, while offering much more with their non-AFK skills. Lastly, Skill 3 enjoys some nice crowd control effects, but overall it suffers from identity problems, not really knowing what it wants to be and what it wants to do, and that 15-second chant is total garbage. In short, Marcille has some value if you are lacking a good AFK earth damage operator, but is niche otherwise. However, if you are looking for a fun and unique operator to experiment with, Marcille is still worth considering. Her mana system offers a fresh take on managing deployment and redeployment times, and while the chanting is definitely obnoxious, I have to admit that it also rewards stage knowledge and careful planning. This can lead to new strategies and give the game a refreshing change of pace for those who are willing to try. And that's about it. I tried to showcase both the goods and bads of Marcille so that you could get a better understanding of her value. Let me know what you think about Marcille in the comments and see you next time.